Good morning, John. You are right. At least there are trees. I love them too, but also I fear them, which is absolutely rational. Trees make oxygen and maple syrup and shady places for us to think about Annie Dillard quotes. Trees make cherries. Who could not like a tree? But you are also correct that they did do an apocalypse. And I want to explain how that worked because I've gotten it wrong in the past. But I also want to talk about how trees are right now trying to do a second apocalypse, and we need to stop them. So, over 300 million years ago, there were fish in the oceans, but there were not yet fish on the land. But there were trees. And it became a thing because there was like a competition going on for light. How do you get the light for yourself and not let the other plants have it? And the answer to that question was lignin, an entirely new molecule that had never existed in the history of the universe. I actually studied lignin in college, so I know more than the average person about lignin. The thing that makes lignin so amazing is that it is a polymer, but it is not a regular polymer. So cellulose is like the same chain every time, which means that like an enzyme just has to do the same thing every time to break that into its constituent sugars and then use those sugars for energy. Lignin is also made out of stuff that you could theoretically digest, but the way that they're bound together is kind of random. Like the length of the chains is random, where the chains branch is random. And this means two things. Like one, it's a very like strong, tough structure that binds together and stays in its conformed shape. And second, it is very hard to break down because an enzyme doesn't just have to attack the same cleavage point every time. It has to be able to attack a bunch of different molecular bonds in order to be good at breaking down lignin, which even to this day, not that many organisms are good at. Termites, you might think of them as something that can digest lignin, but they actually have symbiotic gut bacteria and fungi that actually do the breaking down of the lignin for them. In fact, bacteria can barely break down lignin. Fungi are the only class of organisms that is good at this. Because of this biochemical quirk that creating something that was strong enough to get you up above your competitors also meant you were creating something that could not be broken down by any living thing on Earth yet. Now, eventually most of them would break down just by being exposed to like light and oxygen in the atmosphere. But if they were in a place that was dark and oxygen couldn't get to, there was nothing to break them down ever. So trees in like swampier areas would just stack up and up and up and up for millions of years. These forests would fall down and then just a forest would grow on top of them. And I used to think that, okay, so they're sucking all this oxygen out of the atmosphere. This must be what is going to cause the mass extinction at the end of the Devonian, which I knew was caused by trees, but that's not actually what happened. Something else was the problem. That doesn't seem like it would be that big of a problem. It was phosphorus. Trees would pull nutrients out of the soil and put them in their leaves to do all the tree stuff, and then the leaves would fall off, either because they got old or because they were deciduous or because the tree died. And then those leaves that contain the phosphorus that had been broken out of these rocks in the soil would then wash into the ocean, and the rivers and the oceans filled up with all of this extra phosphorus. And phosphorus is often the limiting factor in like life's ability to thrive in the ocean. So suddenly, oceans got supercharged. There were huge, massive algae blooms supercharged by the phosphorus that trees had taken out of the rock, and when the blooms died because there wasn't enough stuff to like eat all of that algae, they sank down, and as they sunk down, a bunch of microbes broke down the algae, and they consumed all of the oxygen in the water in the process of breaking down the algae until there just wasn't any oxygen in the water anymore, and that was bad. And also there's debate about this, and I don't know how debatey the debate is, but tree roots were also breaking down rocks and exposing rocks that had never been exposed to the air. And when they did that, a bunch of carbon dioxide reacted with the rocks, and that CO2 was then sequestered out of the air, which meant no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, reverse greenhouse effect, got really cold, and that also contributed probably to the Devonian extinction. And then entire marine ecosystems collapsed, coral reefs vanished, 75% of marine species went extinct. Trees did that. That was the first tree apocalypse. It wasn't a comet, it wasn't a volcano, it wasn't like something physical, it was a biological process. Like the thriving of one kind of life led to a huge like apocalypse level event for a bunch of other kinds of life. And that extinction marked the end of the Devonian period and marked the beginning of the Carboniferous. And we call it the Carboniferous because there's a bunch of super carbon-rich coal left behind by those trees. Over time, they fell on top of each other over and over again. They squished themselves and other life down. It got buried, and then it heated up and got pressurized, and it turned into coal. 300 million years later, Humans went and dug up all that coal, and they set it on fire. First, to just stay warm, but then also to build steam engines, to smelt iron, to make fertilizer, to electrify cities. Those same trees that 300 million years ago kicked off an apocalypse-level event on Earth by releasing all this phosphorus into the oceans. Now, and I say now, but I mean a couple hundred years ago, but on geological time, that's now, they are the very same trees that spurred the Industrial Revolution. All that ancient carbon that had been buried and sequestered by time, we put it all back into the atmosphere. Not all of it, but a lot of it back into the atmosphere in just a few centuries. The Industrial Revolution was powered by these long-dead trees. The same trees that kicked off the Devonian mass extinction. Of course, along with a little help from the big-brained, but not so big-brained that they can stop themselves, primates that dug them up and burned them. Trees! You're overachieving in every way I can imagine. There's so many of you. You do so much. But the nice thing about trees is that even if they do kick off 2 apocalypses, you can't blame them for that. They don't have brains. They don't know about the future or the present. So you might think humans are worse than trees because we know what we're doing and we can't stop ourselves. But you might also say, maybe humans are better than trees because at least there's a chance. At least we might be able to stop ourselves, whereas trees, of course, never could. And we are at least getting off of coal. Like, coal use is finally declining. The Industrial Revolution was largely kicked off by coal in the United Kingdom, and they don't burn coal at all anymore. They've burned their last coal. Is it fast enough? No. No. People are like, hey, Hank, are we gonna escape the effects of climate change? No, we're experiencing them now. It's happening now. We've passed the not experiencing negative impacts from climate change part. But the question is, will this be a second apocalypse level event caused by these exact same trees? And the answer to that, I don't know. I don't like that I don't know. We get to decide whether we let trees do a second mass extinction or whether we enable them to be like a beautiful part of the Garden of Earth. And I think we can take that second choice. I think it would be hard to imagine us doing the other thing and shameful to let trees kill everything again. And this is the wild thing. The Industrial Revolution kicked off by all these ancient trees that have already done one apocalypse. That's us working with trees to set off global climate instability. But we can also work with the trees that are alive today to stave off that global instability. We don't have to let those old trees control us. We can work with the new trees, the ones that are doing good. Because, John, at least there are trees. I'll see you on Tuesday. If you want to get John's At Least There Are Trees shirt, it is still available. So this is probably going to be your last reminder. All the proceeds from it go to the Nature Conservancy to honor the work of our dad, who's still at it, by the way. He is amazing. And you can get it at the link in the description.